When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about Maekar Targaryen. This is, for you guys that don't know, the father of Aegon V, and is very present in the Dunk and Egg Tales, especially the first story. So, I want to kind of do a video about him because he reminds me a lot of a fan favorite character, especially on this channel, Stannis. The two are very similar in the way their lives kind of pan out, and we could see some foreshadowing to maybe the way Stannis is going to end up if we look at how Maekar ends up as well. And I just think Maekar is a character that even me as a fan, I very much underappreciated Maekar. And as, you know, I've gotten more into, especially the Blackfyre era, and I've gotten more into his character, I really have found myself craving more of him as a person, like seeing what his life was about, because there's a lot of holes in Maekar's life that we just don't know about. And to me, he's this character that's very fascinating. He's a very complex character in many ways, and it reminds me, again, a lot of Stannis' character. So in this video, we're going to go through who Maekar was, through his entire life. This will be kind of a normal, traditional kind of character analysis. We're going to be focusing on everything from his birth all the way up until his inevitable death in the Peak Rebellion, and even looking at kind of his lasting legacy with his children. So before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach your appeal that might like this content as well, and let's get into the video. So Maekar Targaryen was the fourth child and or son of Daeron II, or Daeron the Good, and Myra Martell. Like we see with Daeron's faction, so something like what we see with Baelor Breakspear is Baelor very much looks Dornish, and that was one of the things that kind of sparked the Blackfyre Rebellion, was that all of the Dornish were really getting into power and things like that. That's how a lot of people that didn't like the Dornish would have viewed it as. But when we get down to Maekar, Maekar didn't have any of that. Maekar kind of looked like your traditional Targaryen. He was really very different looking than Baelor. Even when we get to Dunk and Egg, and I'm gonna, you know, have some quotes in this video about Maekar, Maekar doesn't look anything like Baelor. Whereas Maekar, you can really identify that he's a prince and that he's someone of importance just based upon his looks, and he's a Targaryen. Baelor, it's not the same at all. So again, I want to start out the video with a quote from Maekar, and kind of this really gives you a good perception of who he was and how he was perceived by the public.
Some men will say I meant to kill my brother. The gods know it is a lie, but I will hear the whispers till the day I die. And it was my mace that dealt the fatal blow, I have no doubt. The only other foes he faced in the melee were 3 Kingsguard, whose vows forbade them to do any more than defend themselves. So it was me. Strange to say, I do not recall the blow that broke his skull. Is that a mercy or a curse? Some of both, I think.
So, of course, that quote comes from the end of the first Dunk and Egg novella. And yeah, that is one of my favorite parts. It really shows Maekar and how he already knows what people are going to view him as he wasn't someone that was extremely popular with the commons. He was very much viewed like Stannis in a lot of ways. And we even see that parallel with Stannis and Maekar, where they both end up killing their brother, whether it was in Maekar's case where it was an accident, or Stannis' case where it was on purpose. Both do commit things that take out widely popular figures. Renly was extremely popular. The commons loved him. It's why he was such a big threat in the War of the Five Kings. And you also see Baelor, who, again, loved by a majority of the people, unless you were kind of a Blackfyre sympathizer. So we'll get to that a little bit later on in the video, as it's going to be kind of more towards the middle portion of the video. But I thought that was a really good quote to kind of describe Maekar, and I'm going to bring up another one here from The World of Ice and Fire to also then kind of explore who he was as a person.
Maekar was an energetic king and a warrior of note, but also a harsh man, quick to judge and to condemn. He had never possessed his brother Baelor's gifts that made friends and allies come easily. And after his brother's death at his hands, however inadvertent, he became even more stern and unforgiving.
So again, we kind of see this character that's very stern. He seems like someone that is not the most happy or maybe enjoying life. He seems like someone that, again, is very much like Stannis. I don't think Maekar was maybe nearly as stern or, I guess, grum or are grim as someone like Stannis, but Maekar definitely fits that description. So with all these being said, and can I give you guys just a little bit of a summary of who Maekar is as a person before we get into his life. But we don't know exactly when Maekar was born. He was born anywhere from 174 AC to 179 AC, again as the fourth son. Now, we don't know a ton about Maekar leading up to kind of like the first Blackfire Rebellion. We know that at some point he actually ends up marrying Lady Deanna Dane, and he had 4 sons and 2 daughters. He had Daeron the Drunken, he had Aerion Brightflame, he had Aemon, who is Maester Aemon in the normal story. He then had Daella, and then Aegon the Fifth, and then also Rhea. So again, a lot of children. Now, another thing I'm kind of very interested is what was the relationship between Maekar and Deanna? Because I couldn't really find anything, whether that be in World of Ice and Fire, whether that be just any mentions of the two within the normal story or anything else. I haven't really found anything that would talk to the relationship between the two characters. So we're kind of having to speculate here as well. And when you look at, I think, them having as many kids as they did, they probably had a good relationship. And I think you could maybe, this would be me again speculating, that Maekar losing Deanna, because Deanna dies very, soon after the Blackfire Rebellion. So that could have been something that was kind of like Maekar's Tywin moment, where it was just something that really broke him and was something that was tough for him to swallow. But again, getting back to the chronological order of things, when we look at Maekar, Maekar has his first 2 sons, Daeron and Aerion, before the Blackfire Rebellion. The rest of them will come a little bit after. So again, they're still very young when the Blackfire Rebellion. It's not like they're up and about. They're still very, very young. So none of his children really participate in Blackfire Rebellion, the first one whatsoever. Now, during this time, we also see Maekar being gifted his seat of residence at Summerhall. So again, that's where we see him residing a lot during this time, which would kind of maybe presume that maybe he was not at court at a lot of this time. I would kind of assume, though, that he probably was, at least a little bit. Again, I know he is the 4th son, so he's not as someone that's as important to be being groomed for ruling and being, I guess, looked at as someone that is as important. Again, because I want to point this out, when Maekar becomes king later on, it's very unlikely. There are 3 of his brothers that are in front of him in the line of succession. Those being Baelor, Aerys, and then also Rhaegal. So that alone, okay, it's very unlikely as a 4th son that you're ever going to come to the throne. Plus, you got to look at Baelor having children. You have to look at if Aerys had children, Rhaegal had children. So again, at one point or another, Maekar was kind of like 5th or 6th in line. Like, he should not have come to the throne. So you got to look at Maekar being this character that kind of, I would feel like out of all of the Targaryen children at this time would be kind of forgotten about, because Maekar is someone that he didn't exceed in really any category to make him famous. Like, he was a great warrior, but so is Baelor, and Baelor was more loved, so people would look at Baelor more than they would Maekar. Now, something else, I guess we'll do a little bit of a description here, is that Maekar was powerfully built. He had a beard, he had violet eyes, and his hair was such a pale blonde that was almost white. And Maekar, again, as we learn, was someone that was prickly. He was kind of impatient. It was said that he was a harsh man, and that he was quick to judge and to condemn. Now, I think we can see this with Dunk and Egg, where Maekar is someone that ends up taking his son's side, Daeron and Aerion's side, over Dunk. Now, again, I think it makes sense why he would. Because Maekar is someone that, like a lot of Targaryens, is worried about, his sons, about what's going to come after him, his legacy. And both of these sons, if, the Dunk story was correct and it was believed, it puts a lot of shame on both of his sons. So you kind of see how Maekar is a person that has to I deal with a lot of the issues of his sons. That's something we're going to see come up with Aegon the Fifth as well, his son. So, let's move on. So another part of this I think we need to bring up here is that, again, early on before the Blackfire Rebellion, Maekar had shown skills of being a great warrior. We know Eris and Rhaegal did not show those skills. It was mainly just Baelor and Maekar. But the thing with Maekar is Maekar was very untested going into the first Blackfire Rebellion, whereas Baelor was a tourney champion. He was, very skilled. It was very renowned that he was one of the best warriors to rival Daemon Blackfire. Maekar kind of, I think, went under like everyone. I don't think he really got his name until the first Blackfire Rebellion, because it doesn't really feel like he was given a position of great importance when we look at the councils we're going to see during the Blackfire Rebellion and what his kind of role was. Because when we see like the Battle of the Redgrass Field, Maekar was not someone that was in charge, really. He was someone that, because of people dying, is the one that ends up taking up leadership. He is someone that we're constantly going to see, whether it's through the Blackfire Rebellion, whether it's another Blackfire Rebellion later on, whether it's the Peak Rebellion. Maekar is someone that shows extremely good leadership during these times. Again, something very similar to Stannis, who, again, great leadership during war. And also the other thing that we look at is being underappreciated. And that's something I think Maekar really felt during his younger days, and especially as he got older as well. That kind of gets us into the first Blackfire Rebellion. Now, again, I think Maekar, it's very easy to understand why he's going for the red side, right? His father is the leader of the Reds. It makes complete sense. And why I'm saying the Reds, that is like the Targaryen side, the Blacks would be the Blackfires. So what do we see Maekar doing during the Blackfire Rebellion, which kind of breaks out during 196 AC? We see that Maekar was one of the Targaryen commanders. He wasn't like a high commander, right? Because you had people like Baelor. You had people like Lord Aaron, who was in charge. You had Lord Hayford, who was like the hand at this time. So you just had multiple people that were kind of above Maekar during this time. But what we're going to see is that Maekar is pivotal in the victory against Daemon Blackfire. And something that I think is interesting is when we talk about the Redgrass Field, and I've talked about what was the reason that the Blackfires lost. And there's a lot of reasons, right? One of the reasons is Daemon Blackfire himself and kind of his chivalry getting in the way of him winning the battle decisively and quickly when the battle was being won by Daemon at that point. I've talked about Bittersteel and how he let his emotion get in the way of his judgment in the battle. And so when we look at all of these things that were going on, you kind of see that Maekar gets overshadowed. And again, Baelor is the one that comes in at the end, saves the day. But Maekar is the one that really takes charge, right? Because Lord Donald Aaron's vanguard had been basically destroyed at this point. They were almost all but fleeing. Maekar then starts to lead the charge. And he basically forms a shield wall that's impenetrable. The Blackfires and the Blacks can't get through it. And by the time Baelor shows up, you're now stuck. Okay, well, our rear guard, Bittersteel, abandons his post. You now have Baelor and you have Maekar holding the ground, and it's a sandwich. And as it's known as the hammer and the anvil. Even in the hammer and the anvil sentence and the songs that would be said about this great battle, what sounds cooler, the hammer or the anvil? And Maekar, I think, in a lot of ways, gets forgotten during this battle, as he was pivotal. If Maekar had not rallied the forces during the Redgrass Field, the Red forces probably would have been destroyed by Baelor even got there. And it would have been a much bloodier battle because we would have seen two different forces now just on an open field fighting instead of Baelor having an advantage attacking them in the rear while they were openly fighting another force as well. So again, we see another idea where, we look at Stannis, and a lot of the times we look at Stannis and he goes underappreciated for the things he did, whether that's the Greyjoy Rebellion, whether that's holding Storm's End. He is someone that's underappreciated heavily in the main story, and that's something that drives Stannis' character. Where Stannis is someone that, when Robert finally dies, and Renly is someone that declares he's going to become king, it's kind of like this stab in the back, because Stannis, what he has been to Robert all of these years, is the loyal brother. He's been underappreciated. He's been in Robert's shadow the whole time, and then to have another brother kind of betray him. It's kind of the same feelings I think Maekar could have been feeling. He could have felt a lot of that resentment towards Baelor, towards maybe his father, because of the way he didn't really get this heroic treatment like his brother Baelor did. And that's something when you even look at later on when Baelor ends up dying, even though it was an accident, is that people are going to whisper that Maekar meant to do it because of all of this resentment that had been building up for years and years and years. Now, it's not maybe as big as it was with Robert, where Robert, he constantly seemed like he was slighting Stannis. Maybe some things he didn't intend them to be a slight, but they ended up being one. To Stannis, anyway. Now, Maekar, I don't think it was nearly as deep as that with someone like Baelor, because Baelor just didn't do those things that like Robert did. But again, it's something that has to be noted here. And something we're going to even see a little bit later on here is that as Maekar starts to have more children, and as we see the Targaryen family expand quite a bit, ironically, Daeron II Targaryen sends Aemon to the Citadel to become a maester. And this is an interesting decision here, because the Targaryen family was growing so large. What I believe Daeron kind of faced is he doesn't want to have too many Targaryen heirs maybe competing for the throne, which I think is really weird, because sending Aemon to the Citadel, Aemon at this point was like at least like 10th, 11th, 12th within the line for the throne. It just is a very odd move, and Daeron, I think, makes a lot of odd moves. It's like, if you wanted to maybe, like, send someone to the, like, not the wall, but send somebody to being, like, a maester, or getting them out of the way, you would have thought it would have been, like, other people higher up in the succession, but that doesn't seem like it's the case at all. Like, for instance, somebody like Aerys kind of feels like a good person to make a maester. He was a bookish person. When he becomes king, he's not very good at all. That could have been a good person to kind of get rid of, you know, just to make sure. And I don't know. I think this is a very odd decision. Now, again, Aemon becomes a great maester, and this does make sense. So from that point of it, but it is a little weird because, again, Maekar did not want this. Maekar is someone that, again, as a warrior type, he probably didn't believe in having his sons be like a maester. He kind of feels like that's probably a slight. So when looking at it from Maekar's point of view, you could see, again, another reason for him being resentful towards maybe his father or Baelor. And that's another interesting point. We just see these things where Maekar didn't really have a choice in this. And this compounds when, again, we don't know exactly when Aemon went to the Citadel. It was around 207, 208. But in 209, his wife, Deanna Dane, dies. And again, I've talked about it. We don't know too much about their relationship. We don't know if it was a good relationship or not. So to me, I would like to think it was probably a good relationship, again, based upon how long they were together, how many kids they had. It seems like they had a good relationship, all things being considered. But this could have been a huge blow to Maekar, as Deanna could have been somebody that tempered a lot of Maekar's maybe bad impulses, a lot of his resentment. And now that's kind of a hole there. You know, there's nothing there for Maekar. Maekar is not someone that's going to end up remarrying. So, yeah, this could have been a really bad time for Maekar's life, where you have your father telling you what to do with your children against your will, and your wife dying, and you're kind of figuring out probably around this time that your children aren't great. They're kind of been some disappointments, you know. And even when we get to the first novella with Dunk and Egg, which is kind of the next big point of Maekar's story, the tourney at Ashford, I think, you know, Maekar kind of knew what his children were. I think maybe Aerion, he didn't know as much, because we get this line in the first novella that whenever Maekar was around, Aerion kind of behaved pretty well. But that's going to kind of come to a head where even Maekar, you know, has to realize Aerion's not good. And I think Maekar knows what Daeron is, but he doesn't want to say it. He doesn't want to give it to the public that, yes, my son is incompetent, he's a drunk. And so you look at the way this is going. You have one son that's a drunk. You have another son, especially after the tourney of Ashford, that's a psychopath. That's just cruel, vicious bastard. You have one son that's a maester. You can really start to see why Maekar is very resentful. His children don't really come out the way he had hoped. And is that because of maybe not great parenting between him and Deanna? Is that because of maybe Deanna's death had some sort of trauma on his kids. There could be that as well. So you then get to, again, you have Aegon being, the last like male heir of Maekars. Again, I don't know how he would have viewed his daughters at this time, but I think Maekar, given his personality, and he was really worried about his legacy, I think, and what would come after him. And so you have Aegon, who is a kid that's still very young. He hasn't shown really a lot of skills in combat, really. Maekar is in a position where he doesn't really know what's going to come next. And that's something that I think is really disheartening for someone like Maekar. But as we get into the tourney at Ashford, Maekar had come to see his sons compete, Daeron and Aerion, and his fourth son, Aegon, who we'll know as Aegon V, was to squire for Daeron. Now, unfortunately, this proved terrible for Maekar and his sons. Daeron had drank himself into basically like sleeping, drunkenness at all times before reaching the tournament. Aegon had joined the service of a hedge knight called Duncan the Tall, and Aerion shamed himself during the joust by deliberately killing his opponent's horse. When Duncan attacked Aerion to defend Tanzel, an innocent puppeteer, Aerion demands a trial by combat. Now, what are you supposed to do here if you're Maekar? Right? Like, you can't just go against your sons. That's just something you cannot do for the image of your family. Maekar is put in a very difficult situation because Maekar, seeing all of the things that have happened, I personally believe that Maekar probably knew that Aerion wasn't, telling the truth. But if you admit that, it damages your reputation quite a bit and your children's reputation quite a bit. And so he's put into a really bad situation. So Maekar, then during this trial of 7, is shocked because his brother Baelor ends up on the other side. Now, there are some really interesting points here because, again, from Maekar's point of view, you're looking at Baelor, who he's probably had a lot of resentment built up, and now Baelor is openly challenging your sons and damaging their reputation. You have to feel like in Maekar's eyes that he felt betrayed. Regardless of what Aerion did, you don't go against family. And that's kind of what I think Maekar probably would have been thinking during this time. So that, yes, it was an accident on, I think, Maekar killing Baelor, but I think Maekar probably was extremely pissed at Baelor to begin with. So, again, I think it's an event where you just see emotion probably taking over from Maekar. But Maekar, during this trial of 7, delivers a lethal mace blow to Baelor's head. Baelor survived the trial, but soon dies after Steely Pate removes his helmet. And again, this goes back to the quote I talked about at the beginning of the video, but Maekar suspected that he would thereafter be held in suspicion as a kinslayer. According to the chronicles, Prince Maekar always bitterly regretted Baelor's passing and marked its anniversary every year. Now, again, I want to think about this from Maekar's point of view, right? Maekar at this point still doesn't think he's going to be king. There's so many people in front of him in the line of succession, but I think Maekar comes to this realization that he has killed someone that would have been great for the Targaryen dynasty. He has completely shattered the Targaryen dynasty into a lot of unease. Like, yes, Valar is supposed to come next after Baelor, and he could have been a decent king. Or, we're not completely sure on Valar. We don't have the most information on him. But this is a massive blow to Maekar's reputation. Not only because Maekar becomes a kinslayer, Aerion loses this trial. So that it also basically says that both of his sons lied about Dunk. This is an awful time for Maekar. And you can understand why he would feel this bitterness and just so much regret that could eat someone alive. But Maekar, again, because Maekar is someone that, like Stannis, is taking responsibility. He is someone that believes in justice and duty and things like that. He sends Aerion to the Free Cities and offers Duncan a position in his personal guard to serve as a role model for Aegon. Now, Duncan refuses this for a few reasons. Again, he was a man of Baelor, and he basically asked for Aegon to come with him. Maekar allows for this to happen, and I think this was a fantastic move by Maekar. Maekar, again, and Dunk kind of points this out, it's like, if all of this hasn't worked for raising your children up to this point, why not just have Aegon maybe experience life a bit more, understand what the common people go through on a daily basis and things like that. And again, I think this is one of Maekar's better moves, and this is going to kind of move us forward in the plot as well. Now, Maekar's father, King Daeron II, Valar, and Maetaris die from the Great Spring Sickness. So again, now this is interesting, another point here. If you're sitting here in your Maekar, you know, you lose your father, which, again, I think they probably had a strained relationship. You then see that Baelor's sons both die. So now the wheels start turning, I think, in Maekar's head. I think Maekar at this point probably realized, okay, you know, his older brother Aerys comes to the throne, but Aerys had no children, didn't really think like he wanted any children, and then his other brother Rhaegal was kind of the same in that regard. So I think the wheels start turning in Maekar's head that he's probably going to become king at some point during this time. But what I want to think is very interesting in the way the Blackfires go about doing their rebellions. Think about when they plan their rebellions. The second one is planned when Maekar is kind of out of the picture. He's kind of at Summerhall. He seems like he's brooding. He doesn't have a great relationship with the crown. Because at this point, Maekar is really the best warrior or commander, leadership-wise, that the Targaryens have if war was to break out. And so we see the second Blackfire work its way out. And I think something to also look at when Aerys comes to the throne is you would think that Aerys maybe would make his brother Maekar the hand of the king. That doesn't happen. Another reason why there's a strained relationship here with Maekar and Aerys and the throne as a whole is that Maekar probably should have become the hand of the king. But it ends up going to Bloodraven. And Bloodraven and Maekar at this point did not have a great relationship whatsoever. So again, Maekar is kind of off at Summerhall. Again, Maekar has been done so many disservices at this point. This can be viewed as very similar to when Ned becomes Hand of the King over Stannis. It's very similar in the way the things work out. And so we see a second Blackfire Rebellion try to happen. Nothing really comes of it. And so we kind of continue. But think about it. People were planning this while Maekar was out of the picture. Now, Rhaegal did have one son named Aelor. Now, he, as well as Rhaegal, would also actually die within some accidental deaths in 215 and 217 AC. And at this point, King Aerys, who was childless at the time, recognized his sole surviving brother, Maekar, as his heir. Now, I think what's very interesting is if we go back to when Aemon was sent to the Wall. Aemon was sent there because there was too many Targaryen heirs at the time. Very ironic that we skip a few years after Daeron's death, and now we're getting a little short on Targaryen heirs. Thought that was a little interesting thing to throw in there as well. So at this point, again, Maekar becomes the Prince of Dragonstone. And what I think is interesting is that the third Blackfire Rebellion in 219, again, Aerys is still the king. It happens, and it seems like a really bad time for this to have happened, right? You have Maekar, who now has a good relationship with the throne once again, and we even see that Maekar had great leadership in the war, and that, again, the Targaryens are able to beat back the Blackfires once again. And we even see here interesting, you know, like how Aerion has now come back into the picture after so many years. And, you know, he's still not this guy that's very likable. He's still psychotic, but he has a good moment here. Where when Bittersteel is captured during the third Blackfire Rebellion, it's Aerion's son, along with Bloodraven, that say, we should kill him, not take him in prison. And Aerys doesn't listen. And guess what? Bittersteel gets away again. Now, this will get us 2 years later. Aerys would die, so Maekar would take the Iron Throne. And what I think is very interesting is how we saw that Maekar and Bloodraven had some struggles in their relationship Bloodraven actually stays as the hand of the king. And what I think really is the reason for this is to show the strength of House Targaryen. House Targaryen at this point was in a really weakened state. You know, you had very few heirs left on the throne at this point. You had Daeron, who again was a drunk. You had Aerion, who wasn't great. Aemon was a maester. Aegon was this kid that was kind of wandering around the kingdom as a dunk. Weird, really weird if you're like a noble looking at Aegon. At this point, there was not a lot of options. And yes, you know, Aerion eventually would have a kid, and so would Daeron, but they also weren't really fit for the throne. Daeron's kid was kind of a simpleton. You had Aerion's kid being named Maegor, so that's just a no. So you had a big problem of succession after Maekar. That was the big issue during his reign. Now, we would see that Maekar's reign would take place in between two Blackfire rebellions. Now, why would this happen? And again, I just talked about it, where the Targaryens, you have the two figureheads that have thwarted the Blackfires for years. The two strongest ones. These are not weak people ruling. This is definitely not the time for the Blackfires to invade again. Again, wait for a weaker king like when Aerys was on the throne. Again, two Blackfire rebellions happened during Aerys' reign. Again, it makes sense because Aerys was such a bad king. Now, we see Maekar take a different approach, again supporting my idea that Maekar was trying to show the strength of House Targaryen. Now, he wasn't doing it in a cruel way. He wasn't being violent like someone like Maegor. He was kind of going about it with the Jaehaerys approach, except Maekar didn't have dragons. So what did Maekar do? He basically made a new crown. It was more warlike. It was kind of similar to Aegon's crown, because again, that had been lost during Daeron the Young Dragon's death during the conquest. But during Maekar's reign, it was actually quite peaceful. So again, we see kind of a warlike king have a lot of peace. Again, very similar to Robert. Now, Maekar does a couple things at this point, trying to get some of his children closer to him. He requests for Aemon to come serve the throne. Aemon doesn't end up doing that. Aemon doesn't want to take the Grand Maester's place or anything like that, so Aemon ends up going to serve his brother Daeron. Now, Daeron doesn't have a great fate, as he ends up dying, supposedly from a pox he caught from a whore. We know that Daeron was kind of like a whoring, drinking type of guy. And again, only a few years later, we would also see Aerion die as well, because he's a moron and drank wildfire, thinking it would turn him into a dragon. Very smart guy. So now we're sitting here, and both Aerion and Daeron are dead. And, you know, they both had a child each. You have to be thinking, if you're Maekar, what are we going to do when I die? We are in big trouble. And that was kind of, I feel like, the sentiment of the realm, like what was going to come next. And I think that's why, if you're a Blackfire and you're sitting here and you're going, okay, when do we invade? Well, let's just wait till after Maekar dies. Right, when Maekar dies, it's going to be probably a child on the throne, or it's going to be someone like maybe Aegon, who, again, doesn't appear to be a strong king either. That's the way I would be thinking if I was a Blackfire trying to invade for another time. But at this point, we also saw that Maekar's reign had a hot summer. Again, it also was believed that this could have been the Great Summer. We see this in a quote that Maester Pycelle ends up telling Ned, that a lot of people believe that they'd finally gotten to this Great Summer, no more winter. But that was not to be. It was followed by a short autumn and a long, cold winter. And what I think is very interesting on the timing here, the Peaks end up doing their rebellion in winter. Interesting. Now, why would the Peaks be doing this rebellion? And I have my suspicions. What have we talked about on how the Blackfires would be able to invade? Maekar's death. The Peaks could not honestly have thought that they could have won this war alone. So there's a couple of options that I think make sense here. And again, to talk about the Peaks, they have backed the Blackfires in every single one of these rebellions. The fact that they're still a house, even in the normal story, is actually amazing. But what could they possibly have done here? One, it's they were waiting and thought that Bittersteel may join them, which doesn't end up working. Two, it could have been that, okay, they're trying to destabilize the military. They knew they were trying to destabilize the Targaryens. They knew that Maekar would basically lead from the front line. That's who he was. He was not somebody to sit back and like linger. So I think this was a targeted attack. I think the Peaks knew this wasn't going to win them anything, but that they were going to take out Maekar and make it easier for a Blackfire uprising to happen. And that's kind of what ends up happening to a degree. We end up seeing the Peak uprising fail pretty badly when it comes to them actually taking over any land or winning, but they do end up killing Maekar Targaryen. It was possibly from a rock that was hurled from the battlements of Starpike that crushed Maekar Targaryen. And that would be the end of Maekar Targaryen's life, but it would not be the end of his legacy. And Maekar's legacy would travel into the Great Council that is called by Bloodraven immediately after his death. And his legacy would go through Aegon V and also his son, Aemon Targaryen. And Aegon V had a good reign for some people and a bad reign for others. He was a king that was controversial for the people of Westeros. If you were a nobleman or a rich person, upper class, you didn't like Aegon. Aegon didn't handle both sides that well. And one of the biggest things that we look at with Aegon is how when his son, Jaehaerys II, becomes king, he actually goes about kind of undoing some of the things that Aegon V had done. And so when we look at that point of it, maybe Maekar's legacy dies out a little bit because of Aegon's successes, but also his failures. But then we see Aemon Targaryen. Aemon Targaryen, who was in the main story. Maekar's legacy travels through him, being someone that's been at the wall for long periods of time when he's sent there with Bloodraven. And we still don't know fully what he helped Bloodraven maybe do. The impact of Aemon is felt in all of our characters at the wall, with Sam and Jon and others at the wall. So Maekar is a character that is overlooked a lot in the histories of Westeros. But not only, you know, the normal viewer or the normal casual reader, but even people like me who have a channel about A Song of Ice and Fire, and I've just kind of now come into really liking Maekar as a character. Thank you guys all for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this character analysis. I really enjoyed doing this one, especially as on vacation I read through about half of the Night of the Seven Kingdoms book. I've read it before, but just wanted to read it again. And again, for any of you guys that are not following my Instagram, you should. It's in the description below. But I post on there every once in a while. So you guys that are on Instagram, you knew I've read that. But yeah. Thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.